When my fiancé's mother looked at me across that dinner table, she didn't have to say much. Just one glance, cold, measured, deliberate, told me exactly what she thought I was worth. It wasn't the first time I'd been quietly dismissed. I'd spent years swallowing small humiliations, letting people talk over me, smile at me, pretend to mean well while reminding me where I didn't belong. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that love would be enough to bridge the distance between their world and mine. But that night, when she called me a sweet, simple girl, in front of everyone, when my fiancé laughed softly instead of defending me, something in me cracked, not loudly, just enough to change everything. I smiled back, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. I would stop trying to be accepted. I would let them believe I was harmless, while watching the world they built start to tremble. They had no idea what was coming. The drive up the mountain felt longer than it should have. Snow pressed against the windshield, the wipers carving out narrow slivers of clarity, and somewhere between the switchbacks, I wondered if I was being foolish. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. It whispers even when reason tells you to turn back. By the time I reached the Merrick estate, the world outside was quiet except for the wind slicing through the pines. The house stood there, all glass and light, like it wanted to be seen from space. A uniformed man opened the door before I could knock, his eyes scanning me the way people do when they're deciding if you belong. Inside, warmth hit my face, but it didn't reach me. The air was too polished, too rehearsed. Genevieve Merrick appeared at the top of the stairs, gliding down as if the room existed only to frame her. She took in my sweater, my boots, the snow melting on my sleeves, and offered the kind of smile that makes you aware of every imperfection you have. Colton rushed down behind her, his voice a little too bright, his hand a little too tight around mine. The introductions blurred. I caught words like trust fund, foundation, venture capital, drifting across the table later, while I stirred my soup and tried not to notice how every question about me was really about my usefulness. Genevieve tilted her head when I mentioned my work. Her tone was light, but her eyes weren't. "How lovely," she said, that Colton had chosen someone simple. The word landed like a fingerprint on glass, barely visible, but impossible to erase. So I smiled. I kept my voice even, my hands steady, because sometimes silence is sharper than any reply. When dinner ended, I thanked them, pushing my chair back carefully, aware of how her gaze followed the crumbs I might have left behind. And standing there, with the sound of forks settling on china, I felt something shift. Not anger, not shame, just clarity. That night, I understood exactly what this family needed me to be, and I decided to let them think I would play along. I stayed in Aspen one more day, mostly because Colton asked me to. He said his family needed time to get used to me. I suspected what he really meant was that I needed time to get used to them. Morning light poured through the glass walls, soft and golden, falling across a breakfast table that looked more like a stage set. Genevieve sat at the head, her posture immaculate, reading the Wall Street Journal. Celeste snapped photos of her cappuccino for Instagram, head tilted to catch the light. Edward, quiet and faded like an old portrait, stared through the window toward the pines. He looked like a man who'd once spoken, but had long since stopped being heard. The house smelled like fresh coffee and polished wealth, yet somehow it all reeked of emptiness. Their words were currency, numbers, holdings, foundations, trust funds. They didn't talk to each other, just around each other. I kept my hands folded, my expression pleasant, absorbing everything. When Celeste asked about my family, I told her my mother had passed years ago, leaving me a small house and a single piece of advice. Live simply enough to see who loves you for real. Celeste laughed, sharp, careless. That sounds like something from a public service commercial. I smiled and looked her in the eye. Maybe that's because it's too true for fiction. The air thinned. For a heartbeat, even the spoon stopped clinking. Colton rushed to fill the silence, his laugh too loud, his hand brushing mine as if to apologize. I didn't need him to. The apology belonged to someone else. Genevieve lowered her newspaper and studied me, calm but alert. I could feel her mind turning behind that polished smile. She was no longer underestimating me. She was measuring me. Later that afternoon, while wandering the hallway to find the restroom, I passed by the study. Voices drifted through the half-closed door. Genevieve's smooth, precise tone, and Celeste's echoing laughter. We can't let Colton stay tied to that girl too long. The Pembrokes are waiting for a signal. She's just a placeholder. The word struck like glass splintering. Placeholder. I froze, my breath shallow. The Pembrokes, one of the largest property dynasties in the state, were negotiating a merger with the Merrick Bank. Suddenly, everything made sense. The politeness, the performance, the dinner dressed as a test. I stepped back silently, my reflection flickering in the glossy paneling. A strange calm washed over me, not the quiet of defeat, but the kind that comes before a storm. They thought they were using me. They hadn't realized I'd already started watching them just as closely. That evening, Genevieve insisted on a family dinner before I returned to Denver. Colton tried to act relaxed, holding my hand as if his affection could disguise the tension crawling under his mother's skin. Midway through dessert, Genevieve glanced at Colton with a knowing smile. "Have you spoken to Annabelle lately? She was asking about you yesterday." I turned to her, feigning curiosity. "Annabelle?" She gestured toward a framed photo on the far wall. Colton with a radiant blonde, their hands entwined beneath the gleaming Pembroke logo. The woman my son was supposed to marry, before he got distracted by artistic passions. No one laughed. I looked at the photo and smiled softly. "She's beautiful. I hope she's doing well." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was revealing. The next morning, while Colton showered, his phone buzzed. On the screen, Annabelle P. I didn't open it, just stared at the name long enough to know I didn't need to. He'd later insist she was just a business contact, but that night, scrolling through local news on my own phone, I found a photo of them together at a charity gala, side by side, the caption calling them the future of sustainable finance. I wasn't angry. The feeling was quieter, heavier, like realizing a puzzle you thought was about love was really about power, and every piece already belonged to someone else. When it was time to leave Aspen, Genevieve saw me to the door. Snow was falling again, soft and deliberate. Her voice was low, almost kind. A smart woman knows when to leave before she becomes a complication. I smiled, meeting her eyes. And a strong woman knows when to stay, just long enough to prove she isn't a fool. Her smile faltered. She didn't answer. I walked down the marble steps, boots sinking into the snow, and felt the cold bite at my skin. I knew I wasn't leaving for good. I would stay in their orbit a little longer, not to win their approval, but to find out who among them truly deserved to lose everything. Back in Denver, everything about Colton felt different. His messages, his voice, even his silence. The man who used to make me laugh now made me measure every word, every pause. Each time he texted, "We'll talk later." It felt less like reassurance and more like a warning. One afternoon, he appeared at my office unannounced, holding a bouquet of red roses. His smile was careful, the kind you practice before a mirror. He said his mother thought I'd been tense lately and only wanted to help. I met his eyes, calm but sharp. "I don't need help. Colton, I need respect." He looked away, jaw tightening. That was the moment I knew he'd never defend me, not against her, not against anyone. He belonged to the Merricks, not to me. That night, when he said he had a business meeting, I didn't ask questions. I just drove. Through the city's glowing streets, my gut led me straight to a restaurant where the powerful dined to be seen. And there he was, Colton Merrick, my fiancé, sitting with Annabelle Pembroke. Her hand rested lightly on his, their heads close in the candlelight. It looked practiced, familiar. I took a picture, not because I needed proof of betrayal, I already had that, but because I needed evidence of the pattern. When I turned to leave, a voice stopped me. "Are you Daphne Sinclair?" A man with silver hair and tired eyes introduced himself as Samuel Decker, the former CFO of Merrick Capital. His voice was low, rough from years of being ignored. We sat at a quiet corner of the bar where no one paid attention. "They're using you," he said. "The Merricks. They forged documents for a fake environmental project, green bonds. They're cleaning their books with your name." My pulse slowed. He handed me an envelope. Inside were scans of contracts stamped with Merrick Capital's seal. My forged signature, D. Sinclair. Below it, an email from Colton. "Use her name until the deal is done." The letters blurred before settling into focus again. My stomach didn't drop. It hardened. I asked why he was helping me. Samuel's eyes softened with something like regret. Because they told me the same thing they told you. A smart man knows when to walk away. I did. They thought I'd stay silent. I held the envelope. My voice came out steady. I'm not walking away. I'm staying, but I'll be the storm they never saw coming. For weeks. I lived 2 lives. By day, the affectionate fiancé everyone adored. By night, the woman dissecting her own betrayal line by line. Samuel sent me more documents. Proof that Merrick Capital was bleeding money. Drowning in bad loans disguised as sustainability investments. My company was the mask they wore to survive. One evening, Colton reached for my hand and told me he needed my trust. His eyes held fear. Not love. After we're married, he said, everything will be easier. My mother will come around. I smiled faintly, but in my head, I heard the truth. After we're married, she'll tear me apart herself. That night, while he slept, I installed a data backup on his laptop. He never noticed. Beneath a folder named Family Photos, I found the contract. Merrick Pembroke Green Initiative, Partner Representative, Daphne Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Urban Ecology. I had never signed a thing, yet every line looked legal. The plan was simple: use me to make the fraud look legitimate, then leave me holding the blame when it collapsed. I called Samuel. His voice was calm. Let them keep thinking you're naive. It's the only way we win. I almost laughed. I've been pretending for months, I said, but this time, it's not for love. When I hung up, I stared at Colton's phone glowing beside him. The light caught my ring. The small crack at its center shimmered like a scar. I forwarded every file to Samuel and watched the screen fade to black. For the first time, the silence in that room didn't feel empty. It felt like power gathering quietly before the storm. The email from Genevieve was written in perfect civility, just enough to hide the command beneath it. A small weekend at Merrick Lodge to celebrate the engagement. Bring something simple, dear. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The lodge stood high above Aspen, carved into the mountains, surrounded by pines and snow that swallowed sound. When I arrived, Celeste greeted me with a practiced smile. Hope you packed warm clothes. It's colder up here than it looks. I smiled. I'm used to the cold. Inside, warmth met me, but didn't touch me. The air smelled of cedar and champagne. That night, Colton threw a private party for investors and friends. He played the perfect son, charming and generous, his hand wrapped lightly around mine. I played the perfect fiancé, smiling while my mind recorded every glance. Across the room, Genevieve and Celeste whispered with Annabelle Pembroke, their eyes darting toward me like I was a flaw in the room's symmetry. Later, upstairs, I found Colton's second phone in his coat pocket. My stomach tightened as I unlocked it with his fingerprint. The email was short, clinical. Green bonds signed. Daphne knows nothing. After the engagement, move forward with Pembroke deal. Sent from Colton to Merrick Capital CFO. I copied everything, sent it to Samuel with one line. Proof secured. Ready for phase 2. His reply came fast. Let them walk straight into it. The next morning, during brunch, Genevieve raised her glass. To Daphne, a modest, grounded young woman, proof that simplicity still exists. Laughter followed, polite and poisonous. I laughed too. People always relax when they think they've won. Moments later, Colton dropped to one knee before the crowd. The diamond ring sparkled between us, the small fracture inside catching the light. My phone buzzed with Samuel's text. Say yes. Make them believe they own you. I met Colton's eyes, fear behind the charm, and said yes. That night, I overheard Genevieve whisper to her son, End it gently once the papers are signed. Pembroke will understand. Colton's quiet reply, I know, Mother. I smiled in the dark. They thought the game belonged to them. They didn't realize I'd already rewritten the rules. 2 weeks later, Denver buzzed with headlines written by the Merricks themselves. Heir to Merrick Capital, engaged to humble art teacher. Their fairy tale? Their lie. The engagement gala at the Brown Palace glimmered with chandeliers and champagne. Every powerful name in Denver filled the room, along with several uninvited guests from the SEC, courtesy of Samuel. I arrived late, wrapped in an emerald silk gown that shimmered like calm water. The music stopped. Celeste froze mid-sentence. Genevieve's face drained of color. A journalist whispered, "That's Daphne Sinclair, the founder of Sinclair Urban Ecology." The lie unraveled in seconds. From across the room, Samuel appeared, briefcase in hand. He nodded once. Everything was ready. Genevieve seized my arm, her voice shaking. "You deceived us," I smiled softly. "No, I just let you reveal yourselves." Her expression shifted, from anger to dread. When Colton stepped on stage to speak, I moved closer to Samuel. He whispered, "It's time." I lifted my glass, steady as glass itself. This wasn't an engagement. It was the overture to their downfall. And I was no longer pretending to belong. The ballroom at the Brown Palace was heavy with champagne and silence. The jazz band fell quiet as chandeliers dimmed, their light trembling over rows of frozen faces. Genevieve stood at the podium, her smile stretched thin. Colton's looked strained, like a man who sensed his kingdom slipping away. Genevieve lifted her glass, voice smooth and hollow. "Tonight, we celebrate a love that rises above class and circumstance." Applause rippled through the room. At the back, Samuel gave me a single nod. It was time. When Genevieve called me forward, I took the microphone, my hands steady. "Thank you, Mrs. Ishmerich, and thank you for coming to witness the truth." The laughter that followed died quickly. When I met this family, I pretended to be ordinary, just to see if kindness could survive without status attached to it. Colton's face paled. "Daphne, what are you doing?" I met his eyes. "Telling the truth, something your family's forgotten." I turned to the crowd. "I'm not a teacher. I'm the founder of Sinclair Urban Ecology, the company Merrick Capital used to falsify their green bonds." Gasps filled the air. SEC agents stepped forward as Samuel handed over documents. Genevieve stumbled, wine spilling across her white dress like blood. Colton reached for me. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said softly. "You did." I just turned on the lights. I slid off the cracked diamond ring and left it on the mic. Some fractures never heal, and I walked away. By morning, every headline screamed the same thing: Merrick Capital under federal investigation for green investment fraud. Overnight, their empire collapsed under its own shine. Colton disappeared for 3 days before showing up at my apartment door, drenched in snow, eyes hollow. His voice trembled. "I was wrong. Daphne, I was scared. Of my mother. Of losing everything. But I loved you." I stood there, unmoved. The anger was gone. Only clarity remained. If love were real, you would have protected me when they humiliated me. Love can't save anyone if it's built on silence. His tears mixed with the melting snow as I quietly closed the door. The sound of him crying faded into the storm. That same evening, Samuel called. The SEC had cleared his name and suspended Merrick Capital's license. He sent me a scanned copy of the official report, proof that truth doesn't always need to shout. Genevieve resigned from every board she ever ruled. Celeste fled to Europe. Edward left Aspen without a word. Samuel's voice was soft over the phone. "I used to think justice had to be loud. You showed me it can be quiet too." I smiled faintly. "I didn't win, Samuel. I just stopped playing their game." That night, I packed my things and left Denver behind. I didn't need applause, only peace enough to breathe. A year later, I live in a small cabin overlooking the snow-covered peaks of Estes Park. Mornings here are quiet, just the crackle of the fire, the whistle of the wind, and the smell of fresh coffee filling the room. Sunlight filters through the frosted window, glinting off the mug in my hand and the letter lying on the table. It's from Samuel. Merrick Capital's license has been permanently revoked. Their name will disappear from the industry. I fold the letter carefully and look outside. Snow drifts down in slow, deliberate flakes, soft enough to erase old footprints. On the shelf, my mother's diamond necklace catches the light. It's the only piece I kept, not for its worth, but for what it reminds me of. Her voice telling me that grace isn't found in wealth, but in how you survive without it. I kneel by the fireplace and toss in an old engagement card. The paper curls and blackens, the flame rising emerald green, the same color as the dress I wore the night I ended them. The light flickers across the wooden walls, steady and alive. I think of Genevieve and the lessons she tried to teach me about status and power. I learned the opposite. No one is richer than the one who's done pretending. The wind hums through the cracks, snow thickens outside, and I whisper to the fire, almost smiling. I only pretended to be poor to find out who truly was. The flames burn brighter, their reflection warm against the glass, and in that light, I finally feel free.